He thought it would be funny, a rich man forcing a black waitress to play piano for his table, just for laughs. But what happened next? It didn't just silence the room, it changed everything. You won't believe how her story ends, from being mocked in front of strangers to standing ovations around the world. Stick around till the end, and if this moved you, hit that subscribe button for more powerful stories like this. The dining hall of White Oaks Country Club shimmered with soft golden light and polished egos. Laughter echoed beneath the chandeliers as well-dressed patrons clinked champagne glasses and tossed around boardroom war stories like locker room banter. Among them was Brent Holloway, a bloated tech executive with too much money and far too little grace. He had been drinking, loudly. And when his eyes landed on Janelle, the young black waitress gliding from table to table with poise, he found his next target. "Hey, you there, Mozart!" he bellowed across the room, pointing a half-empty whiskey glass at her. Janelle froze for a moment, unsure if he was even talking to her. Her tray tilted slightly as she caught a wineglass just in time. She turned slowly, forcing a polite smile. "Yes, sir." Brent stood up unsteadily, gesturing toward the glossy black grand piano near the bar. "How about a little tune, sweetheart? Bet you know your way around a piano. Y'all got soul, right?" The comment hung in the air like smoke. A few guests chuckled nervously. Others looked away. But no one intervened. Janelle's manager, a thin man with slicked back hair and a nervous twitch, appeared beside her like a shadow. "Just humor him," he whispered quickly. "It's Brent Holloway, he bankrolls the club's events. Just play something simple." Janelle's heart thudded against her ribs. Not because she was scared, but because she knew exactly what this was. This wasn't a request. It was a performance, and not the musical kind. This was about power, about putting her on display, about turning a hard-working black woman into the night's joke. But she also knew something Brent didn't. She nodded once, setting her tray down gently. The silver clinked as it touched the bar. Then she walked toward the grand piano with quiet purpose, her back straight, her steps calm. The chatter in the room dimmed. Phones were raised. Brent leaned back in his chair, confident she was about to embarrass herself. Janelle sat on the bench, took a breath, and let her fingers hover over the keys. For a moment, the room held its breath. What they expected was a clumsy attempt. What they got was a reckoning. And the first note hadn't even been played yet. The polished mahogany of the grand piano gleamed under the overhead lights like it had been waiting for this very moment. Janelle sat down slowly, adjusting the bench with a grace that belied the tension coiling in her chest. Her hands rested gently in her lap as she scanned the room, every face staring back at her, not with hope, but with smug anticipation. She recognized that look. She'd seen it in classrooms when she was the only black girl asked to read out loud, in boardrooms when she delivered coffee instead of talking strategy. It was the same tired gaze, the kind that expected her to fumble, to prove her place was at the edge of the spotlight, not in it. Brent leaned back in his leather chair, arms crossed, wearing a grin so wide it practically spilled into arrogance. He nudged the man next to him and whispered something crude, sending the table into muffled laughter. One woman pulled out her phone and began recording. A few patrons, sensing spectacle, even began to inch closer for a better view. Janelle noticed it all, but didn't flinch. Her manager hovered near the bar, eyes darting nervously. He gave her a stiff thumbs up, like she was about to recite a poem at a middle school assembly. To him, this was damage control. A quick melody, a shallow bow, and the night would go back to normal. But nothing about this moment was normal to Janelle. Because this wasn't just about music. It was about dignity. She slid her fingers across the keys lightly, not playing, just touching, remembering the thousands of hours spent at her grandmother's upright piano in their old Detroit living room. The late nights. The blistered fingers. The joy. The grief. The discipline. Everything the room couldn't see. Then she closed her eyes. The laughter died down, like a fire running out of oxygen. The clinking of silverware faded. Even the bartender paused mid-pour. Janelle took a deep breath, as if inhaling every insult, every dismissal, every microaggression she'd ever endured, and transformed it into stillness. The room expected a melody. But what she was about to give them was a memory. One that would echo louder than any applause. And shatter every smirk in that room. The room was so quiet, you could hear the weight of expectation pressing against the walls. Janelle's hands hovered over the keys like they were remembering an old language, one that had been buried, not forgotten. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer gravity of this moment. This wasn't just performance. This was reclamation. Then, like a single drop of water falling into a still lake, the first note rang out. Soft. Low. Melancholy. It wasn't the cheerful ditty they were expecting, not a lounge piece or jazz riff that fit the aesthetic of cocktail hour. No, this note came from somewhere deeper. Darker. The kind of place music only touches when it's pulled from pain. Janelle's eyes remained closed as her hands moved with eerie precision, weaving a somber melody that crept into the room like fog. The kind of tune that makes you sit still because something inside you recognizes it, even if your mind doesn't know why. Guests who had been smiling moments earlier now furrowed their brows. A couple clutched their wine glasses a little tighter. The woman recording with her phone lowered it slowly, unsure if she was capturing a joke or witnessing something sacred. Brent leaned forward, frowning. This wasn't what he ordered. He wanted clumsy key mashing. He wanted a spectacle. What he got instead was something he couldn't control. The song began to build. Her left hand rumbled with cascading bass notes while the right flew over the higher keys, a delicate dance of pain and power. The sound was haunting, ethereal, something that didn't belong in a country club but in a concert hall or cathedral. And yet, here it was, unapologetic, defiant, beautiful. Janelle was no longer just the waitress in a pressed white blouse. She was a composer, a survivor, a storyteller in sound. Every note was a word. Every crescendo a scream. Every pause, a breath held too long. The room could no longer look away. Somewhere near the back, a guest wiped away a tear, not even sure why. Another man, who hadn't touched his drink all night, leaned forward like a child at a bedtime story. And still, Janelle played. Because once her fingers touched the keys, there was no turning back. Only truth. The melody poured from Janelle like it had been waiting years to be heard, coiling through the air with raw emotion and uncanny precision. Every rise and fall of the notes wasn't just art, it was autobiography. The chords were heavy, deliberate, full of a grief that didn't ask for permission to exist. And that's when something strange began to happen. The music didn't just silence the room, it pulled people inward. Eyes that once held condescension now flickered with confusion, then wonder. Brent's smirk had melted into a furrowed brow. His drink sat untouched. He leaned forward, almost involuntarily, like his body recognized what his pride refused to admit. This was genius. Because Janelle wasn't playing a cover or reciting a tune from memory, she was speaking through the piano. With the voice of someone who had once been silenced. Someone who had once had it all, and lost it. Once upon a time, before she was serving plates to executives who never learned her name, Janelle had been known in very different circles. As a child, she was a prodigy, accepted into Juilliard's youth program at just 11 years old. Her fingers danced through Chopin and Liszt like they were her native tongue. Critics called her a once-in-a-generation talent, and invitations poured in from across the country. But at 13, tragedy struck. Her father, her biggest supporter, her first piano teacher, passed suddenly. Grief consumed the household, and bills piled higher than sheet music. Her mother worked 3 jobs. Lessons stopped. The piano was sold. Music, once a lifeline, became a ghost. And now, all these years later, in a dining hall filled with people who had judged her by her apron and her skin, that ghost had returned. But this time, it roared. Janelle wasn't just playing music. She was reclaiming a part of herself that the world had forced her to bury beneath survival and sacrifice. And it was working. Each note was a key turning in the lock of her own resurrection. People in the crowd didn't know her past. But they felt it. They didn't know the details. But they knew, deep in their bones, that this woman was not a waitress who played piano. She was a pianist who had simply been waiting for someone to listen. Not a soul moved. The moment Janelle's music surged into its second movement, the entire room felt like it was holding its breath. The clinking of cutlery had stopped. Conversations evaporated. Even the waitstaff stood still, trays frozen midair, eyes wide with disbelief. The melody no longer whispered, it soared. Each note collided with the next like waves crashing on an emotional shoreline. Her fingers didn't just dance. They testified. This wasn't background music. This was a reckoning. Brent, who had orchestrated this spectacle in arrogance, now sat stiff in his leather chair. His jaw was clenched, brow furrowed, hands clasped tightly together. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew, instinctively, that whatever this was, it wasn't about him anymore. He had asked for a joke. And instead, he got a mirror. One that reflected back every assumption, every moment of casual cruelty, every time he dismissed someone because of their job, their skin, their silence. He looked around, but no one was looking back at him anymore. They were all looking at her. Janelle, with her eyes closed and her face tilted gently upward, was utterly transformed. Gone was the woman who had quietly taken his order hours earlier. Before them now was a force, raw, masterful, unforgettable. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't even trying to prove a point. She was simply being. And in that authenticity, the crowd was undone. An elderly woman seated near the bar had tears quietly slipping down her cheeks. A young couple, who had initially chuckled at Brent's joke, now sat hand in hand, their fingers gripped tight. Even the manager, the one who had whispered for Janelle to just play something simple, stood frozen, mouth slightly open, shame creeping into his eyes. No one had expected this. No one had imagined that the grandest voice in the room wouldn't come from a CEO, or a politician, or a donor, but from a woman whose name they hadn't even bothered to learn before tonight. And still, she played. With every chord, Janelle dismantled the hierarchy the room had been built on. With every pause, she reminded them what silence was truly meant for. And in that moment, surrounded by stunned silence and humbled hearts, one thing was finally clear. The waitress wasn't performing for them. They were witnessing her truth. And they were lucky to be in the room when it happened. The final notes trembled through the air like ripples across still water, soft, deliberate, haunting. Janelle's fingers slowed, hovering on the last chord, holding it in place as if reluctant to let go. Then, with the gentlest lift of her hands, the music ended. Silence fell again, but this time, it was sacred. Reverent. The kind of silence that follows a storm not of destruction, but of revelation. She sat still for a moment longer, eyes still closed, as if she were giving the room a chance to catch its breath. Or perhaps giving herself one. When she finally opened them, the light above her seemed a little warmer, a little softer, and every face before her had changed. The smirks were gone. The mockery had vanished. All that remained was awe. No one spoke. Not even Brent. His once arrogant posture had collapsed into quiet disbelief. His arms were folded tightly across his chest, but not out of defiance, out of discomfort. It was the look of a man being confronted by a truth too powerful to argue with. A long beat passed. Then, from the back of the room, a single sound broke the stillness. Clap. One elderly woman rose from her chair and began to applaud slowly, hands trembling not from age, but from emotion. Her eyes glistened. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Bravo!" The spell shattered, and the room erupted. A standing ovation swept across the hall like a wave. People who wouldn't have spared Janelle a glance an hour earlier were now clapping furiously, some whistling, some wiping tears from their faces. The pianist who had been treated like entertainment had just become the soul of the evening. But Janelle didn't bask in it. She stood gracefully, offered a small bow, and walked away from the piano without a word. She didn't need to speak. She had said everything she needed through the music. As she passed Brent's table, he looked up at her, but this time, not with sarcasm or entitlement. His lips parted, as if to say something, but no words came. He looked like a man who had just witnessed something divine and didn't know how to ask for forgiveness. Janelle didn't stop. She didn't need his apology. She had taken back the power. And the final note still echoed, in the keys, in the silence, and in every heart that had just been changed. The performance was supposed to vanish into the night like every other forgettable country club dinner. But someone had been filming. The short, vertical video started with Brent's drunken demand, "Come on, play something for us." Followed by the camera panning to Janelle walking slowly toward the grand piano, her apron still tied around her waist, her face unreadable. Then came the music. That breathtaking, soul-stirring music. The clip barely captured 3 minutes of her performance, but it was enough. Enough to feel the weight in every note. Enough to sense the tension in the room. Enough to see how an entire hall of privileged patrons fell silent beneath the genius of a woman they had underestimated. By the time Janelle reached home that night, her phone was buzzing non-stop. First a message from a fellow server, "Girl, you're going viral." Then another from her old piano instructor she hadn't spoken to in years. "Is this really you?" And then her social media apps. Exploding. On TikTok, the video was stitched with comments like, "This gave me chills," and "I don't know her name, but she's already a legend." On Instagram, music influencers reposted it with captions like, "This is what raw talent looks like." Even Grammy-winning artists started commenting, "Who is she?" Within 24 hours, the video had hit 5 million views. By the end of the week, 20 million. The headlines rolled in. Waitress silences elite dinner crowd with jaw-dropping piano performance. From the shadows to center stage, the woman who played the truth. Juilliard talent turned server stuns the world in viral clip. TV shows began reaching out. Talk shows wanted interviews. A prominent music label offered to fly her out for a recording deal. Old friends, distant cousins, and college acquaintances reappeared, suddenly remembering how they always knew she was special. But through it all, Janelle remained grounded. She hadn't played for fame. She hadn't played to go viral. She played because, for the first time in years, someone handed her the keys to a piano, and this time, she decided not to shrink. She decided to be heard. And the world. It finally listened. Not to a waitress. Not to a sideshow. But to a woman reclaiming her gift. Note by note, chord by chord. In front of everyone who thought she had none. 2 weeks after the viral video shattered the internet, Janelle stood on a very different stage. No apron. No tray in her hands. Just a sleek, black Steinway and a spotlight that finally felt like it belonged to her. The venue was packed, press in the back, music lovers up front, and a long line of eager attendees still trying to get through the doors. Tonight was her debut solo performance, sponsored by a major label and streamed live across multiple platforms. But even with the buzz, Janelle hadn't forgotten where this all began. In the front row sat her mother, beaming through tears. Next to her was the elderly woman who'd first stood and clapped at White Oaks Country Club, invited personally by Janelle as a guest of honor. And tucked quietly in a corner of the second row, was Brent Holloway. He hadn't expected an invitation. In truth, he hadn't expected to be remembered at all. But when he received the simple envelope marked, "Everyone deserves a second chance to listen," he came. Not as a VIP. Not as a benefactor. But as a student of humility. The lights dimmed. The audience fell into silence. Janelle stepped out in a flowing black gown, elegant and composed, the same stillness in her expression as the night she silenced the country club. She sat at the piano. And this time, there were no orders. No mocking demands. No stares of doubt. Just breathless anticipation. Her fingers moved like they had been waiting for this all her life. Each note told her story. Of a girl with music in her bones, of a father lost too soon, of talent buried under bills and broken dreams. And of a spark reignited not in fame, but in defiance. When the final note rang out, the room rose to its feet. This time not in shock, but in celebration. Applause thundered like a standing ovation meant for every overlooked, underestimated soul who was ever told to stay in their place. Janelle smiled, bowed once, and looked out into the lights. She hadn't just reclaimed her stage. She'd built a new one. And on it, her story would echo far beyond the walls of that country club, into living rooms, classrooms, and hearts all over the world. Because she didn't just play music. She became it. And now, the world knew her name. What started as a cruel joke became the moment the world discovered a hidden legend. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary voices rise from the most unexpected places, and when they do, they don't just play music, they make history.